My name is Jill Coyle, and from years of experience as a divorce attorney, I know for a fact that no one dies from divorce. The experts and I are here to show you how to not only survive, but thrive during the most difficult times. Welcome to another episode of No One Dies from Divorce, but today we are doing the scandal of a history. So it has nothing to do with divorce. Actually, we could connect it to divorce and we'll get to that, but we are talking about the Alec Murdaugh scandal, the family scandal, because it's so prevalent. And as I have gone down the rabbit hole of learning everything about it, I am absolutely fascinated at the lies, the web that was created in this family, and just shows that there are still prominent families within this country that have the power to get away with really, really bad things. And my partner in crime, Kara North, here is going to join me on this podcast. Hi, Kara.
Hey, Jill. I'm excited to chat with this one about you. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And me and Kara have both gone down just to learn as much information as we can to just bring this all to you, that you can understand this entirety of this scandal within this podcast. So we're really excited. Now, Kara, you guys may know, works with me with Moxie Law Group. We have founded the first female personal injury firm in Utah. And our goal is to spread throughout the country to give more female empowerment and attorneys in this space to be able to bring a better way of representing you in personal injury. So we absolutely love it. And let me just introduce Kara real fast. So Kara was born and raised in Utah. She graduated from Utah Valley University with a Bachelor's of Science in Business Management. She obtained her Juris Doctorate from the University of Utah in 2010. She's licensed in both Utah and Nevada, and she previously practiced criminal defense and was part of the defense team for the high-profile murder trial of Dr. Martin McNeil in Utah in 2013, which was featured on Dateline 2020 and Nancy Grace. Which I love that, because before I was a family law attorney, I did criminal law as well. I worked for a judge in my first year of law school. I was part of the Mark Hacking trial, which if you're from Utah, you probably know that name. Mm-hmm. Very, very similar to a Murdaugh in the fact that he had webbed this entire life of lies, and then he ended up killing his wife and is now serving life in prison in Utah or somewhere. And so me and Kara kind of have an experience in this to be able to talk about it and break this down for you. Kara's also super active in our community, whether it's through her alumni association. She's the board president for Utah Valley University. She's the Utah Associate of Justice Jury. Oh, sorry. You're the Utah Associate of Justice Women's Caucus Chair. Your Utah Association of Justice Jury Selection Development Committee. You're also on the Women's Lawyers of Utah 4th District Chair. You're a Utah Bar Exam Grader, and then you're the Central Utah Bar Association President. You were that in 2020, 2021. So Kara's a go-getter like me, which is why we were perfect to be married and in business together. So anyways, Kara, that's Kara.
I was going to say my best association is with Jill Coyle. So yes.
We love it. And that's why when we decided to do this podcast, it was a no-brainer. This has just been fascinating to me, Kara. I mean, you along with this podcast, we've watched I watched trial. I watched so much of it. I didn't watch every minute for minute, but I've watched majority of it. I've watched the Netflix series. I've watched the Dateline that came out. I mean, I feel like, and then I've read so much about it. Just first of all, Kara, what's your initial just thoughts of this case?
Oh, I think anyone who reads all the stories about the Murdaugh family and everything that's gone on, it just reeks of privilege, every level of it, right? And I think in my mind, honestly, it really starts with the fact that these kids were permitted to drink underage and were permitted to do pretty much whatever they wanted without consequence. And I think
Right.
that that's where it all kind of spurred and started. And I think that had there been a little bit better parenting going on with some of those things that they shouldn't have been doing, perhaps this whole snowball wouldn't have even started. It
Well,
was
and
pretty astounding.
so the Murdaugh family has been in this South Carolina town for the past, 100 years.
Right.
And they, are all lawyers. They're super prominent within this city. They've gone from being, the prosecutors to the defense attorneys. They do personal injury. I mean, this family is just well founded in this town. Everybody said that it's very rare if you live in this town and don't know the Murdaugh name. And it's crazy to me that we live in a day where if you come from a prominent family, or just like you said, white privilege, that you can get away literally with murder. I mean, again, we're just going to be talking about the coincidences that tie back to this family. But I'm telling you what, I'm the kind of person that if there's enough coincidences that tie you back to this family, then it's probably has direct, ties to this family.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, we'll just do a quick disclaimer that like there's been no charge and conviction regarded Stephen Smith's death or Gloria Satterfield's death or, even Mallory's death. But I do think, like you said, where there's smoke, there's fire. And so obviously we'll just talk about the fact that there's some strong coincidences here that lead to some inferences of wrongdoing by this family.
Right. And also we're attorneys, but we are just taking down the facts as we know them and giving you the information that we are. And in the meantime, we can give our professional opinion because that's all we're doing. It's just an opinion. But let's go to this case was kind of interesting because it started in the middle with Paul and this boat crash, but we're going to go back so that we can start in the timeline. But it wasn't until that 2019 boat crash that then the questions between that, go all the way back to this Stephen Smith started to go forward. But I think it's important for us to kind of start there. So on July 8, 2015, Stephen Smith, who was 19, was found dead on Sandy Run Road in Hampton County. There was no arrest made in this case. Now, what I find very, very interesting is that the Stephen Smith was found in the middle of the road. And so the police kind of deduced it as a hit and run. But there was a few problems in my mind as an attorney with the evidence of it being a hit and run. The first of all, he had blunt force trauma to his head, the back of his head. No other parts of his body had any damage.
Yeah, that's not going to happen with a car accident. If you're getting hit, you're going to have some damage internally in your chest or legs or stomach, somewhere in there.
And you're going to be thrown up and you're going to have scratches. I mean, yeah, that maybe the back of the head could get hit if you hit a windshield, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot more trauma. And there was none. Not only that, he was found perfectly positioned in the middle of the road, which again was very, very strange. He had his shoes on and his shoes weren't tied. I think that's another huge coincidence of the fact that if you're getting hit by a car and you have shoes that just slip on your feet, the shoe is going to fly off.
They're not going to stay on. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this what happened was in the midst of the death of Stephen Smith, they interviewed a ton of people. And there was all these reports that were tracing them back to the Murdaugh boys, Paul and Buster.
Correct. Because Stephen was a classmate of Buster's, right?
Yes. Yeah. Right. And, and it goes down to that there was some kind of connection with them. Stephen Smith was an openly gay person at their high school. There was just a lot of connections to this. And a lot of people were using the Murdaugh name. But not once did those the detectives go and interview anybody in the Murdaugh family.
I think one quick point we want to make for anybody who hypothetically has been under a rock and not been listening to or following this case, we're speaking specifically about the Alex Murdaugh family, his wife, Maggie, their two sons, Buster and Paul. who live in this town in South Carolina and who all this is about. So Buster's the older brother, Paul's the younger brother. Just a little backstory there.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. I guess I should have started there. But again, you think that this has been on the news and prevalent.
Yeah.
But so that case dies. They never find a suspect. They never find, a car. And that's the other thing is, in 2019 or 15, when Stephen Smith, there are still cell phones. There's still cameras everywhere. If it was a hit and run, there would have been somewhere down the line of a camera looking for a car that had some kind of damage. And they didn't find any of that. And then they just closed the case, or they just stopped looking for it. Which is heartbreaking for the family of Stephen Smith, that they just kind of had to let, his son. I would assume that they never were able to find peace because they actually didn't know what happened to him.
Correct. Yeah. That'd be heartbreaking.
Yeah. So then we get to the nanny. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure. The Murdaugh family had a nanny who her name was Gloria Satterfield. And by all accounts, she raised Paul. From everything that is out there in the public sphere, all the friends and family, they said that Paul didn't have a great relationship with his mom, Maggie, but he felt this really close affinity for his nanny and housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. And in fact, I think I heard somewhere that she was the only picture that he had in his wallet, was because of their close relationship, and that she really did that motherly role for him that he didn't get from Maggie. He kind of felt some resentment towards Maggie, or felt like he was a disappointment to her. And so Gloria was at their house as she was as a housekeeper and nanny. And all of a sudden there's a 911 call that says that she's fallen and hit her head on the steps. And according to Alex Murdaugh, she just got tangled up in their dogs because they had a lot of dogs. And as a result, that he claims that she fell and hit her head on the front brick steps. And she was in the hospital for a couple of weeks and then ultimately passed away from her injuries. And that was in February of 2018.
And again, at the time that this has happened, there wasn't really an investigation in it. She was buried. Alex Murdaugh then, said at the time that I'm going to, sue my own house insurance so that I can make sure I get a settlement for you, so you're taken care of. And it was kind of just put away. That's kind of how it was left. But now that we're fast forward, we know all of this new evidence that has come out that is just absolutely crazy. The first thing is, we know that Alex Murdaugh had pulled out this huge house insurance policy only 30 days prior to her dying. We also know that she had found his opioids a couple times, because there was testimony of Paul's girlfriend now that has come out that said that, the housekeeper was finding these drugs and that she had confronted Alex Murdaugh about it. So we're now looking back and we're like, oh my gosh, he killed her for this, this house, insurance. Now, again, that hasn't come out in a court of law, but we're kind of looking back and thinking now, a couple things now, fast forward, that they've done. They've exhumed her body. So they're now going to do more of a thorough autopsy on her to try to figure out exactly how she died. But when we look at this, I mean, why was this not more of an investigation?
Well, the tricky thing for me that stands out just initially, as now fully invested in personal injury, right? It's right that you can make a claim against someone's homeowner's insurance policy when they have a dangerous and defective condition that can cause injury or death that they knew about that maybe you didn't know about. Now, I think it's tricky to argue she wouldn't have known about these brick steps or whatever because she's at their house every day. And I don't think brick steps are inherently dangerous on their own. But number one, Mr. Alex Murdaugh would have been the defendant as the homeowner's insurance owner and policyholder. There's no way in heck he should have had the right. It's a conflict of interest for him to represent the estate and the family against himself. So I'm sure he tried to just run it through his law firm, but my assumption is that he likely handled it all. there were some public documents that came out that showed that there was an original settlement of around $500,000, which the Satterfield boys have claimed that they've never received and didn't even know existed. So it's curious that that settlement could have gone through with Mr. Murdaugh not even having the quote client sign off on it. That's obviously a huge ethical and professional violation. And then they found some additional documentation with a judge's order saying the settlement was for $4.3 million. And supposedly, at least according to the documentation, because whenever you get an order like that, you say how much is going to the attorney, how much is going to the family, how much is paying whatever medical bills might exist. And supposedly, according to that documentation that was from May of 2019, the Satterfield boys were supposed to receive $2.76 million, which again, they've claimed that they've never received. And so certainly this feeds into that web of lies and destruction and misappropriation of funds that Alex was doing within his law firm.
Yeah. And I wanted to just point out, like, the nanny, she had been in this family for 20 years. Mm-hmm. She had probably walked up and down those steps thousands of times, but not only that, she knows the dogs. So to say that she was just like walking and the dog got tangled and she just tripped and then hit her head hard enough, again, is just something that I think is highly suspect. And you're absolutely right, Kara. That's what's so crazy about this is now through, we find out that he had settled for this large personal injury, lawsuit on behalf of her, and he kept all the money.
Right.
I mean, obviously, like you can get disbarred if you like misappropriate $10 of your client's money. You're going to get disbarred if $2.7 million goes missing.
Right. And he did, right? Ultimately, we know that Alex Murdaugh was disbarred by the state of South Carolina from practicing law and was, we can talk to this later, but kicked out of his law firm, et cetera.
Right.
But I think it's just really unfortunate that there just wasn't more investigation done, kind of like the Stephen Smith case with respect to Gloria Satterfield. There was no real investigation done. They just took their word for it. It was Maggie and Alex both who just said, oh, well, she just fell and got tangled up. And there was no more critical eye taken by the police, which we know is likely because of their personal relationships with the Murdaugh family over all these years.
Yeah. Well, so that goes to the third murder that is, what we would say is directly related to this family, and that's Mallory Beach. So we've already talked about it, that in 2019, February of 2019, Paul and 5 of his friends decided to get on their boat to go up the river to go to a oyster. What do you call
bake.
it? An
oyster bake?
Yeah. Sounds disgusting. I'm not an oyster fan. But, the friends didn't really want to drive on the boat. It was really cold outside, but ultimately Paul is very, very, convincing. He was very, very adamant of it. And so they just decided to do it. Now looking in with all this evidence, it looks like it was because he wanted to drink. And if he drank and drive, he'd have more of an ability to get caught. Whereas on the waterways, there's not cops sitting there, So, right. This is just heartbreaking because you just see video of them throughout the night, just drinking and drinking. And it's come out now that Paul, who was 19 at the time, was a raging alcoholic.
Right.
And this is what goes exactly to your point, Kara, is that the parents clearly didn't care, because the girlfriend of Paul now has specifically talked about how they would drink in front of their parents. And it's been proven
alcohol for them. Yeah. That they would take them to the Kentucky Derby and buy them drinks and take them out of town and buy them drinks. And it was very common. And that at one point, even the girlfriend said to Maggie, hey, Paul's got a real problem sometimes, and he turns into a different person when he drinks. And Maggie almost wouldn't hear of it. She found it to be so offensive that anybody would imply that her son couldn't control himself with his alcohol.
Yeah, I can't remember. They call him a different name when he gets so inebriated. Timmy. Yeah.
Timmy.
Exactly. And the night of the crash, they got done with the oyster bake. They got on the boat, and then Paul wanted to stop to go to a bar, and everybody didn't want to, but he was insisting. He's like, it's my boat. And, I don't even know why these kids like didn't just call an Uber. I mean, they knew he was drunk. I mean, you see him doing shots, and and then you see the very last video of them made was them walking down the dock, and he is like not even able to stand up straight.
Right.
And
well, it's real quick before they go to the bar to drink. What they did before that was they stopped at a gas station, a convenience store, and Paul used Buster's ID to purchase alcohol because Buster was over 21. And it's just interesting because Paul and Buster, yes, they both have red hair, but they don't look anything alike. And clearly this convenience store displayed some negligence in not being more careful with respect to verifying the ID. And that's why they were named in the wrongful death lawsuit that we're going to talk about in a minute. But I just think, yeah, there's several levels of we're drinking all night long that these kids are participating in, and nobody's stopping them or putting them in check.
Exactly. And they go into this bar, and, part of me is like, well, I thought everybody knew who the Murdaughs were. So did they know that Paul Murdaugh is sitting in that bar and they're just serving him drinks? Like, we're not talking like beer, like we're talking like hardcore liquor, like, and he would, and everybody, that all the friends said that it was clear he was inebriated in the bar. He was loud. Which bartenders are supposed to have some kind of deference to be able to cut, these kids off,
cut people off. Yeah.
And they didn't.
Right.
Anyways, we know what happens next. They all get on the boat, but again, they get back on the boat, and they're going to go. And this is where it was heartbreaking to me when I watched the Netflix of what happened in that boat moments before it crashed. And that was, everybody was fighting with Paul because he was drunk, and they were like, please let us drive. And Paul was just belligerent. Yeah.
Right.
And was just not letting him drive and saying, this is my boat. But then his girlfriend got involved. They had broken up. They weren't technically girlfriend and boyfriend at the time, but she was the one who said, Paul, you need to let somebody else drive. And she talked about this in the Netflix series, that he started calling her horrible names, degrading
insulting her family. Yeah.
And then he came over and slapped her across the face. And I think that it shocked the friends, because what they said is that they all just kind of got quiet, and they just kind of stopped fighting him because they didn't really know what to do. Because then Paul went and got back behind the wheel. He sped up the boat, and within seconds, they then hit the pylons of a bridge. And the scene was just horrific after. 3 people got thrown into the water. Mallory Beach got thrown in the water, and she was the one that they couldn't find immediately. And the rest of them got hurt. Paul actually was the one that didn't get hurt the most. And I think it was probably because he was so drunk that's, it's just like DUIs. When the drunk person usually walks away from the crash.
Right.
And he was probably holding onto the steering wheel, but his friend Ron hit his face on the screen, had like horrible cuts.
Yeah. Connor.
Yeah. Sorry. And then Mallory's boyfriend went into the water. I think he just got lucky that he didn't hit the pylon like Mallory did. He had messed up shoulder. I mean, it was just horrible. And then Paul's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend like hurt her hand really, really bad.
Right. Sounds like kind of degloved her finger, and it was bleeding profusely. And yeah, like you said, Connor's teeth went through his lower jaw, and that was dislocated. And so everybody's hurt, everybody's freaking out. They call authorities, and they recognize that they can't find Mallory. She's not coming up from the water. They don't know what's going on. And yeah, as we now know, Mallory unfortunately hit her head, blunt force trauma to her head, and ended up drowning because of that trauma to her head, where she likely was knocked unconscious, I'm assuming, by being thrown from the boat. So I think it was interesting that when they call the authorities, they've got kind of just utter chaos. They've got all these different departments responding. They've got Paul, who's clearly inebriated, clearly underage, and nobody pulls him aside and says, "Hey, son, tell me what happened tonight. Tell me what's going on." And in fact, Anthony, Mallory's boyfriend, is saying, "Do you know who that is? That's Paul Murdaugh. He's Alex Murdaugh's son. Good luck, because no, what happened is he just killed my girlfriend, and nobody's going to care." And it's interesting that none of the police even say, "Oh no, we'll take care of it. We'll get to the bottom of it." They just don't respond.
Right. Well,
I
why
also thought it
everybody
was-
else is on the phone to 911 saying, "Please come help." Paul Murdaugh is heard on the phone to who? His
his
grandfather.
dad and grandpa, yep,
Yep.
who were his fixers. His dad and his grandpa were his fixers, that whenever he got into trouble, he called them and they cleaned it up for him, which we know from a prior girlfriend relaying when they had a car accident. She tries to call 911. He takes her phone, throws it away, because he's got guns and beer cans all over, and the family comes and cleans it up. And Maggie again chastises the girlfriend, saying, "You could have gotten my son in trouble, knock it off." It's just those layers of privilege that keep adding up that you see, which unfortunately I think led to this fateful night.
Right. And then what happened that night was just, Alec Murdaugh's calling parents, telling them that don't talk to the police. Like, I have to, I'll protect your kids. And, then Alec Murdaugh is calling Connor's parents being like, "Hey, isn't that unfortunate that Connor was driving the boat?" And they were like, "Why would Connor be driving Paul's boat?" Like, there was so much like entanglement of them trying to get in there to keep Paul out of trouble. It's sickening.
Well, and even just showing up at the hospital at the time, Alex and his father, I think, was it Randolph? Was that the grandpa's name?
Yeah.
They show up at the hospital. All these kids are just having this traumatic experience, and they're flashing their solicitor's badges, which in some states means they're part of law enforcement. They're part of the team, as far as that's why they have all these relationships with the police officers. And if you don't think that had a chilling effect on those kids, or the relationship that they had with the police from telling the truth immediately about, no, this was Paul, eventually it did come out, and they had an accident reconstructionist support that Paul was driving. But I think it definitely had a chilling effect, and it was meant to send a message that we're the law.
Yeah,
we're the law around here.
Yeah. And it clearly just scared those kids. And Alec Murdaugh telling Connor's parents that I can protect Connor more than I can protect Paul. Just bull crap. Like, and then in the meantime, they are all at the hospital knowing that Mallory is probably dead and they can't find her. It's just horrible. And from the testimony that has come out from all those kids and the parents, Alec and his father were never talking about like, "Hey, how are you guys doing? Are you, how are you feeling?" It was all like just business. What do we need to do to protect our kid? And it's just horrible.
And it was so, I think, insulting and disgusting that law enforcement never had the decency to contact Mallory's parents and say, "Hey, we're really sorry. There's been an unfortunate accident here. This is what's happened." And they just dismiss it and say, "Well, until we really know." And Anthony's mom sitting there saying, "I have her phone number, but I don't feel like I should be the one to call." And she's right. She shouldn't have been the one to call, but the law enforcement should have stood up and said, "Yeah, we'll take responsibility for that unfortunate event." And nobody had the guts to do it.
Yeah. Well, so then, about 2 months after, about a month and a half after it, then Paul Murdaugh is finally indicted on charges of boating under the influence causing death and 2 counts of boating under the influence causing great bodily harm. And he, with those charges, if found guilty, was looking to 55 years in prison. And, he pled not guilty. And at the
never
time
handcuffed in the courtroom,
never
put in a jumpsuit for court, never even taken into jail.
His bond was $50,000,
which was nothing to them at that point.
No.
Right.
And then at the time of his death, which was June 7th, 2021, and we're going to get there, he still had not gone to trial on it.
Right.
So he had been out, and the reports were that he was drinking and playing with friends. That kid never, ever felt the gravity of what was going on with this.
Because his family always cleaned up his messes, and he knew that the likelihood that he'd actually have any consequences from this were slim to none.
Well, usually you're out on like probation, or you're on, release terms of no drinking. And I mean, clearly we had videos of him drinking and he didn't care. So, or they had no release terms, which is crazy to me.
Right.
So
Mallory's family files a wrongful death suit.
Yeah.
Wrongful death suit, for anyone who's not familiar, says it's a civil case. So the standard of proof is less than criminal court. And it's saying, hey, we believe that you played a significant contributing factor in the death of our family member. And so her family has the right as her heirs to bring that claim against Paul's family. So what they do is they name the convenience store that sold the alcohol. They name the bar. They name Paul. They name Alex because Paul is driving. They name Alex for negligent entrustment with respect to allowing their son, who they knew drank and drove, all the time, to be in possession and control of that boat. And then they also name Buster for allowing Paul to use Buster's ID to purchase the alcohol. So that's who gets named. And that lawsuit was ongoing until recently, but we can talk more about that. So,
well, let's just talk about it. Tell them what happens in the lawsuit.
So
no, before you do, because the lawsuit is the triggering effect that led up to the deaths of Maggie. And I think it's very, very important. So let's actually talk about this. So in this lawsuit, because Alec was made a defendant, it was ordered that all of the defendants had to provide their financials, meaning they had to show how much money they had, or life insurance. This is very common. Kara can talk all about this because this is what she does all day. To be able, because as personal injury attorneys, we have to know how much money is out there. So we know what we can do for apportionment and what we can do to ensure that we can collect on the betterment of our clients.
Well, and supposedly leading up to this, right, is Mallory's family and her attorneys are being told, listen, we'd love to settle with you, but Alex has no money. Alex is broke. Alex has nothing. And when you know that this is a prominent, wealthy family who owns 1,700 acres in town, that probably doesn't pass muster, which is why during the discovery process, discovery is a process in lawsuits where the parties have to exchange information to one another. And so I can ask anything to any opposing party that's relevant to the case at hand, and they have to provide me with that information, and vice versa. So in a hearing on June 4th, 2021, the court said, no, you're going to have to produce your financials, because they had been resistant to that and trying to refuse to provide that information to Mallory's attorney and their family.
And not only that, but the law firm was starting to look inward to find out where the misappropriation, because Alec kept saying he has no money, but the law firm was like on its books showing that he was making over $1 million a year on average. And then they were noticing that there was some misappropriation with the books. So this is a fact that came out afterwards, but June 7th, he was confronted from the CFO of his law firm with these issues. And Alec at the time, from what we hear, told this guy, I have an opioid addiction. I don't, there's all these problems and I can't really tell you what's going on. He left that meeting with like, hey, we're going to talk about this. This is a problem. That was June 7th. Okay,
was
guys?
That the same day that he issued a statement to the public, like to newspapers, saying, I've decided to resign from my law firm?
Not yet.
Okay.
That what June 7th is the day that Maggie and Paul were murdered.
Right. And
when I heard that, my brain I was like, are you kidding me? So he was confronted by his CFO. 2 days prior, he was ordered by a judge that you are going to have to come to court and disclose your financials, which is going to show all of this misappropriation. At the time, he had $4.5 million from the Satterfield that we didn't know where it was. So all of this is going to unravel.
Well, and what's the timing with respect to the rumors that Maggie had been meeting with a divorce attorney, that she'd hired a forensic accountant to start looking into all of this as well. I think it's happening all around the same time
It
where
is.
Maggie's starting to ask questions too.
It is. And in fact, she hadn't been sleeping at Mansfield during leading up to this a few days. She'd been staying with her sister. And Alec called her on June 7th and said, hey, I need you to come to Mansfield. My dad is dying. I'm really sad and I could really use you. She called her sister on the way to Mansfield and was like, I feel like he's acting weird. I don't really know what's going on. And her sister testified in court that said, hey, it sounds like he's having a hard time with losing his dad. You should go.
You should support him. Yep.
And she broke down on the stand and said, that was the last thing I told my sister. And I basically led her to the slaughterhouse. I mean, your heart just breaks for this sister. You could have never imagined. There are a lot of people that do really bad things, white collar crimes, but the unthinkable is that they would then turn around and kill their wife and their child to cover it up. Or from what the prosecutors put on at court was, this was all a ploy to take attention away from his financial issues and turn it back on sympathy. You guys, this is the straight up actions of a narcissist, like hardcore narcissist who would rather see his child and wife die than to face the consequences or to have anybody be able to see that he was a fraud.
Right. He wanted the town to feel sympathy and sorry for him and, rally around him because, this tragic event. And when it happens, and we're getting into these facts right now, but he tries to tell law enforcement it's all related to the boat accident. There were threats made against my family.
It was one of the first things he told the officer when he walked up to him, was that he started trying to bring in this reasonable doubt that it was somebody else. And so Maggie and Paul were shot, two different guns, horrific, on their property by their dog kennels. This is one of the craziest facts of this case, is that he calls 911. Well, Kara, I didn't know this, but did you know that 911 starts recording you as soon as you call? So when it's ringing, they are recording you. And the craziest thing about the 911 call is that it was silent. Alec Murdaugh was silent. And then as soon as 911 picks up and says, hi, 911, what's your emergency? You can hear him just then all of a sudden go into hysterical. That's great. I mean, anyways, it's just another piece of the puzzle that I was like, this doesn't add up. So
which as a solicitor, if he's previously been a prosecutor, how dumb that he doesn't know that. You know what I mean? Like, that's committing crime 101. I think you should know that. But I guess when you're in the height of the situation, you don't think through that. But
right. Another really, really crucial piece, I think, of evidence that came out at trial right at this time is that he's in a white t-shirt and shorts when the cop comes up to him. And he tells the cop that he turned Paul over to feel for his pulse, and then he tried to feel the pulse of Maggie. Paul had been shot in the head so much that half of his head was like gone. He would have been bleeding out every crevice. You rolled over, Paul, you had blood on your hands, you had blood on your clothes. Maggie had been shot in the neck. You turned over Maggie to feel her pulse, you're going to have blood. He had absolutely no blood on him. In fact, his clothes were tested later, no blood spattering. So, I mean, there is just no way that it's credible that when he told that police officer he rolled over Paul, it was accurate.
Right.
So
he calls 911.
Yep.
He calls 911 at 10:07 p.m. and he says, I need the police and an ambulance immediately. My wife and my child have been shot badly. And he does sound hysterical on the phone. He sounds very upset. And the sheriff's office responds to the scene along with, they call it SLED, the State Law Enforcement Division. And they get there around 10:30, 10:40. And then the sheriff's office gets there at 10:30. SLED arrives around 11:45. And the thing that was just kind of appalling to me was the fact that they don't immediately treat him as a suspect. They do just wholeheartedly lean into that victim. He must be, a victim and so lucky to be alive kind of a situation, because the officers that are supposed to be investigating him are hugging him and putting their arm on his shoulder and consoling him in a way that you shouldn't be consoling somebody who's the only, person found at a murder scene, a gruesome murder scene.
And he even tells the cop, I brought a gun down to the shed because this is he tells them that he took the golf cart and he drove down the dog kennels to find them, but then he had a gun. He never tells them that he goes back to the house to get a gun. Like, you wouldn't be at the house thinking, what, my wife and son haven't answered their phones. Maybe they're dead down at the dog kennel. It's not walking distance, guys. It's it's hundreds of yards. And anyways, everything that I'm looking at this now as a lawyer, as a, impartial person, his story never added up from the beginning. And it frustrated me so much, the lack of what the police officers did at the scene.
Right.
They didn't even take there wasn't even like, it should have been treated as a homicide scene. They should have been taking fingerprints. They should have been confiscated all guns on the property. They should have scoured.
Checking his hands for gunshot residue. None of that was done. None of that was done.
None.
And the fact that there was 2 firearms used, I think was his ploy or plan to make it look like there were multiple people that had come to throw the scent off, or to make them think that there was 2 people that shot Maggie and Paul. Yeah.
Just and then his interviews were not even in the police station. They were done in a car.
Right.
And now looking at the interviews, I mean, I love the piecemeal that they've done now with his testimony in court. I mean, it was all lies.
Right.
You're just lying. And it was just horrific. And then another thing that should have, like, they did a graveside service 3 days later.
Right.
You put bodies in the ground when you don't want anybody looking at that body.
Right.
And just crazy. And I mean, it's with young people like this too, like usually they want to do big, huge mournings. They want to make sure that because everybody's going to come and mourn the loss of these people. And nope, 3 days later in the ground.
Right. Well, because he had other things to do. He had other things that needed his attention. And I think he genuinely believed that he had covered this up well enough. And it was critical to just get everybody to move on as quickly as possible.
Right. And I think it's important, now that we've watched the trial, let's just talk about some of the biggest evidence that came out in trial.
Okay.
So when he told the police officers that he was with the family at the kennels, but then he went back to the house, he took a nap, and then he left to his mom's house about 8:47 or 8:40. He went down there, he was with her, and then he didn't come back until about 10, whatever, when he called 911. And that was his story. That is what he told investigators the night of the shooting, and then the 2 subsequent interviews afterwards, that he was nowhere near the kennel. And we all know he gets on the stand, which, Kara, is that normal with the defense for a criminal case?
So if people don't know, I think they should know, right? Like, the Constitution permits that you don't have to take the stand against yourself, right? Like, you don't have to testify in your trial. And in fact, there's admonitions given to the jury that says, just because someone chooses not to testify, you can't read into that. You can't use that as some sort of admission of guilt. They have the right not to testify, and you shouldn't hold that against them. So 99.9% of the time, most attorneys will say, you're not getting on the stand, because the legal presumption is in our favor. Even though, of course, juries always speculate about why. But I do think Paul and Alex and his attorney genuinely believed that he was the smartest person in the room, and with enough preparation could trip people up and make them believe his story. Because I mean, even just sitting in the courtroom several times, he got emotional, he put on a show. And I think they thought, well, let's let them hear from you, and you put on that same show you did when you called 911, and people are going to believe whatever you tell them.
Yeah. Well, I think he really thought that he was going to stick to his story no matter what. He would have gotten on the stand and stuck to his lie until the biggest piece of evidence came out, when they were able to forensically identify Paul's phone. They found a Snapchat video of Alec Murdaugh's voice on the phone at 8:04 or 8:14, something like that, which is literally minutes before what they believed was the shooting, to where Alex Murdaugh was heard on the video talking. I mean, all the jurors that have coming out after the trial now are saying that that's what just sealed the reasonable doubt. Like, he was there and he had lied about it. But what's crazy to me as an attorney is that you get that piece of evidence. The prosecutor gave that probably to his defense attorneys a year ago or whatever. And now you're like, oh, you lied. Well, you can't lie on the stand. What are you going to do? I'm going to get on the stand and I'm going to change my lie. And the first time that anybody had heard this lie, they didn't do a motion to change his alibi. They didn't do a motion for, there's so many things that his defense attorney could have done to bring that testimony back into evidence, but they didn't. He got on the stand. Those prosecutors had never heard that version of the story.
Right.
Just so you guys know, the version of the story changed to where he said, oh yeah, I was at the kennels, but then I went back to the house. I napped for like probably a total of 8 minutes, like literally, because then they found his phone and all of a sudden he was in a fury of activity to where he then got in the car and walked. But he, in the meantime of just being in his house taking a nap, walked 200 steps within
283.
Yep, you know that. Within a certain amount of time, but he was napping.
Within 4 minutes. Yep.
Yeah. And then he went to his mom's house at a super late hour, which the caretaker for the mom was super random and not normal.
Mom has dementia.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere, and Jill, I'm wondering if you can remind me if this is accurate or not, that his dad, who was also a fixer, ended up dying 2 or 3 days after this.
I don't think it was that close, but his dad did die.
Yeah. I thought it was within the same week from old age, natural causes, supposedly.
I think it was right before he committed suicide, tried to commit suicide.
Okay.
It's it. But anyways, we could talk literally for hours about this case. It just keeps going. It's just crazy to me.
But it is a tactic that his defense attorneys took at trial where you admit, yes, I lied previously. Yes, I was wrong. Yes, all these things weren't, I wasn't truthful about X, Y, and Z, but now I'm being truthful. And that's kind of the defense tactic that they took, right? Was I was lying then, but now I'm telling you the truth.
I was surprised that his defense attorneys did the sit down interview on Dateline. And they talked about how they called the lie, the big lie. Like that's what it is. Now, Kara and I, there are certain things that as attorneys, we have client confidentiality. If a client tells us that they did commit the crime, we cannot disclose that. It's our duty to make sure the prosecution proves their state beyond a reasonable doubt. It's how the scales of justice work. And with that, however, we do have ethical boundaries. And there are a couple of things that if we find out as attorneys, we have to withdraw. We cannot be your attorney anymore. The first one is if we know they're lying on the stand.
Yeah, we can't solicit false testimony.
Right. So if we know of the big lie, and then we have an Alec Murdaugh that says, I'm going to get on the stand and lie again. There is, you as the attorney cannot represent that person. You can be found you could lose your bar license. The second thing that we are allowed to protect is if there's going to be harm to others. So a crime's going to be committed, a computer crime or child or elder abuse. Those are the only ways that we can then disclose something that a client's told us. So defense attorneys, for the most part, don't want to know. Don't talk. Don't tell me. My job is to make sure that the prosecution proves their case and poke holes in it where I can. Now, some of you may say that's so horrible. Defense attorneys are evil. And I'm just saying no, because prosecutors can be evil and people are wrongly charged with crimes. Defense attorneys keep the system honest. And I know that you are like, well, some people get off. Yes, but some people get wrongly convicted. And we have to have both sides of it to allow the scales of justice to continue to work. So when you say, how can that guy represent Alec Murdaugh? Because we needed to make sure that those prosecution had their case solid, and then he was charged and found guilty by a group of his peers.
Right.
Anyways, I defend defense attorneys because I think they are the most important thing that work that does in our line of being a lawyer.
Right.
So that we get to trial and he talks about the lie, he admits it on the stand. And my thought is, so he's telling the juries, I lied in my business. I stole all this money. I lied. But believe me now.
Right. Which is always hard. It's never going to go well because, yeah. And I mean, and he even tried to sell it off with, well, I lied initially and oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practiced to deceive, and he said, so I just had to keep going with it. And I just had to, I couldn't go back on what I had already said. And so that's why I just, poor me, again, victim mentality. He's trying to make people feel bad for him.
Did you see that when the judge laid down his sentence, he said, he asked him, he said, I have a question for you. You said on the stand that, oh, the tangled web we weave. What did you mean by that? Did you see that? And Alec Murdaugh just said, I got into so many lies. I couldn't stop. And he said, exactly. When did the lies stop?
Right.
And then he said, anyways, I thought that was really profound because that's exactly right. He says, I couldn't stop lying. I just could. And so, but then he was all of a sudden supposed to have the jury believe that he had stopped lying.
Right. That suddenly and what do you think about Buster testifying on the stand for his dad to try and humanize him, try and create that sympathy of, oh, my dad would never do this to our family.
Yeah. But it also makes me think that maybe he has some disassociation disorder or some narcissistic, because for him to just sit there, I felt like he was pretty cold and callous, a little bit like non-emotional. And for him to want to be like there on behalf of his dad, I think is, I mean, he's his only family that he's got left. So maybe that's the reason. But I thought that it was cold of Alex to make his son do that. Right. But who cares? I mean, Alex doesn't care about another human being on this earth. So after the death, then all of these financial crimes are coming down. He's now been, I think that's when his dad does die. He gets his bar license suspended. He gets fired from his law firm. And then like 2 months later, we hear that he has been shot on the side of the road. And he calls 911 again. He's really good at that.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, I was on the side of the road, changing a tire, and somebody stopped and attacked me and shot me.
Right.
Well, what? That was a horrible lie, because about a week later, the investigators find out, no, that wasn't true. You paid some guy to come and shoot you, and it was a botched. It didn't kill him. He was trying to get, his $10 million life insurance for Buster. Which, if Buster would have gotten that 10 million, would that have been able to be used for purposes of the wrongful death settlements?
Yeah, I think it would have, because then it just becomes part of his estate. And then he would
Even
have had
though
those
the
assets
beneficiary
available.
is Buster, and Buster wasn't made part of the suit.
Buster was made part of the suit, remember, because of the ID situation. So that's where they were able to bring Buster into the wrongful death suit with Mallory's family. And because he had given Paul his ID, or didn't, prevent Paul from taking his ID to get the alcohol when he was underage. And so that's why Buster was named in the lawsuit. And that's why, yes, I think had he inherited the $10 million, then he would have had to use that as part of the settlement with Mallory's family. Another interesting point too, just this is something that came up in the trial that I worked on here, the murder trial that I worked on here in Utah, was, and I don't know if they have this in South Carolina, but in Utah, we have something called the Slayer statute. And it sounds really horrible, but it's because it is. It says if you cause the death of somebody, you cannot inherit from their life insurance policy. So I think that was an important factor that, besides not wanting to be found guilty, Alex needed the life insurance from Maggie. And if there was life insurance on Paul, he needed to not be found guilty in order to inherit all that money. And I think obviously for a period of time, he was starting to get away with it. So I'd be curious to know what kind of an investigation the insurance company was making into the deaths as well.
From what I understand, there actually wasn't life insurance on Maggie and Paul. So he was not charged with insurance fraud for that. He was charged with insurance fraud for trying to kill himself to get that insurance. Mm-hmm. And then he was charged with insurance fraud for the settlement of Satterfield. So again, I think that this was, I don't know. We're never going to know the exact thing unless he decides mm-hmm. to tell us all what was happening. Mm-hmm. Because right. South Carolina doesn't have the death penalty. If you're all wondering, that's why he didn't get the death penalty. It wasn't on the table, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But that was just for the murders of Maggie and Paul. He is being charged with over 100 different financial crimes.
Some of which he admitted to while he was on the stand, which is also just astonishing that they weren't more careful about that. Because again, right. Even when you're on the stand, you don't have to incriminate yourself. He could have pled the fifth with respect to some of those financial crime questions, and he didn't.
Right. I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, in my mind, he'd plea out and just ask the judge to do the crimes or the sentences consecutively to his 2 life terms. But mm-hmm. part of me is like, I think he likes the attention. I think that he might say, nope, let's go to trial at all, just so that I can come to court and I don't know.
Yep. Right.
And I would assume Buster is going to write a book about it and make millions of dollars because everybody's going to want to know his opinion. I don't know. The whole thing is just, unless I have seen it to where, well, in the wrongful death, if they settled, I mean, that could have been part of the terms, is that Buster can never write or get money from anything that has to do with the death. But I haven't seen the settlement, so I don't even know if that's a possibility.
Right. Which is an important point to bring up. So the Satterfield family, I believe, has recently settled their suit against the Murdaugh estate. I don't know quite all the terms of that, but also Mallory Beach's family within the past month announced that they did settle their lawsuit specifically against Buster for $50 million. And the likelihood that they're ever actually going to get $50 million out of Buster or the Murdaugh estate, I think, is probably slim to none, unfortunately. But what will likely happen is they'll have to sell some of Moselle and some of the other properties. They owned another, the Murdaugh family had another second home, I think, that they'll likely have to sell as well to kind of fulfill some of that settlement obligation.
They actually put Moselle's property up for sale in early 2022, but as of right now, I don't think it's sold. I mean, I don't know if anybody would go in and, pay top dollar for a property that has, 2 murders on it. But I was actually surprised it was worth they listed it for $3.9 million for 7,900 acres. I would assume it's because it's South Carolina. It's a small town. So it just seemed to me like it was really low, but,
right.
Right. But yeah, And now we're going to have to go back to the Stephen Smith death. We're going to, I would imagine things are going to go after that, to decide if, there was more to that. And it will be interesting to see if Buster gets implicated in that, because from what we know is Buster and Paul could possibly have been involved that night. And then the Satterfield case, just because they've settled the civil case doesn't mean that there can't be implications or charges that go criminally if they find that there was some criminal wrongdoing. So, so it's crazy. And one of the things I thought, what did you think about the fact that the murder trial happened so fast?
That was actually really shocking to me. It was about 17 days? And I think given the number of witnesses and
not necessarily the trial was 23 days, but I'm surprised how fast the trial got to jury. About 9 months after charges went down. It was really fast in my mind, but they did a motion for speedy trial. So I don't know if he wanted it so more information won't come out, or all of the financial stuff wouldn't be settled. I don't know.
I don't think waiting was in his benefit, right? You're right. I think the more they waited to get a trial date, the more bad information was going to come out. And it did give investigators more time to start piecing the puzzle together, right? It was in his best interest to invoke his right to a speedy trial and move quickly to get it done, right? I do think he thought he was going to be so charismatic and suave, and he had gotten away with everything else and always, got his family out of trouble before. I think he really thought he was going to talk his way out of this. And I think if we've both looked at interviews from jurors who participated in the trial who have said, the initial vote was 2 people didn't think he was guilty. 1 person wasn't sure. And then the rest thought he was guilty. And so obviously there were some people that were swayed initially by his testimony. And they did say, like you said, that the ultimate, deciding factor that moved the needle for them was that recording that showed that Alex was on the property when he said he wasn't.
And no other evidence leading toward anybody else. I mean, if you're thinking about creating the perfect crime, you obviously causing reasonable doubt on who could have done it, which Alec did in his initial meeting with the police officer. He was like, oh, my son was in a boat crash and he's been getting threats on his life. But there would have been car tracks, there would have been footsteps, there would have been, something, broken branches that would have led you to believe that some person ran, and there was nothing to lead anybody to anything, that there was anybody else that did this. The last piece of evidence that I thought was crazy is a few days after the murders, Alec goes to his mom's house and he has something rolled up in like a blue tarp, is what the caretaker said. And when they searched the mom's house, they found a blue tarp that was tucked in the back of the closet. And when they did testing, there was gun residue all throughout the jacket. So, I mean, to me, that was another piece of evidence that just clearly implicated him in the murders. Him not having blood on him when he had gone to the house, he had cleaned everything up. He probably was fully covered. We don't know where the clothes are that we saw in a video earlier that day. They never found those clothes, mind you. And they never found the guns. The other thing that was really crazy to me is learning through all this is that a couple of days later, here comes the Murdaugh clan who clear out all the guns out of the house.
Yep.
Even though they owned 2 of the guns, the exact guns that ended up killing him. So. Yeah,
because those were never brought into evidence, were they?
No, they never found the murder weapon.
Which supports that, again, because Alex had brothers. He was one of 2 or 3 boys in that family. Yeah. And again, the police were unwilling to go to the brothers and say, hey, we need those firearms. We need, to investigate you more thoroughly. And none of that happened, which I think, even though, yes, this case resulted in a conviction for murder against Alex Murdaugh, I don't think for one second that the people of this community will think that the whole story has come out about this family, or that they have fully been held accountable for everything that their family has done.
Yeah. And the civil suit for Mallory Beach, that attorney who is doing the wrongful death, it plays a huge role in uncovering this fraud. And I'm sure he carries a lot of weight because of his lawsuit. It's basically what triggered, I believe, the action of Alec to kill his wife and child. But I just, I don't know if he'll ever hear our podcast, but if he does, I just want to let him know that he did a great service in uncovering this. And I'm grateful he was there for that family, because being, a personal injury attorney, sometimes we get a bad rap that we're just out there for money, and that's not right. Like, we do our job because we want to help people that have literally gone through some of the worst and horrific things. And Mallory's family has dealt with the worst. And, he was a big part of finding justice for them. And, he was on the Netflix documentary, he was on Dateline, and the timeline and stuff that he put together was very, very helpful. I hope once he settles this, he writes a book, because his perspective from a lawyer will be very, very interesting and appreciated.
Right. Well, and it was, just to second, what you've said on that, though, he himself said he knew the Murdaughs, he knew who they were, he'd gone against them in other cases. And the fact that he was willing to take on that case and kind of stake his own reputation and his own, just standing within the legal community to go up against a big giant like the Murdaugh family, I think, like you said, just deserves a lot of commendation and recognition that he did a lot to bring justice to Mallory's family. Yeah.
Yeah. And remember, personal injury attorneys like Kara and I, we don't take $1 unless we win for you in court. And one of the things that we've strived, and I'm just going to give a little pitch or, shout out to Moxie Law, is that we will never be afraid to go to court if it means that justice and getting you more of what you deserved is in your best interest. And that's what you can be guaranteed at Moxie, is
Right.
that you're number one, and we're taking care of you to make sure that you get what is fair and what is deserved. This has been so crazy. I feel like I was just inundated. We didn't even get to half of it. We could probably do a part 2, but this case just will go down in history as one of the craziest, most prolific, sad tragedies of our time.
Right. But I think it's great that we're bringing some recognition to it, and that you are talking about these issues, and that people can see, that there is going to start to be accountability for people who think they're above the law.
Yeah. And if you have a personal injury need, whether it's a wrongful death, a medical malpractice, a car accident, and you want to just talk to us, call Kara. Tell them how to find us and phone number.
Yeah, so you can find us at www.moxielawgroup.com. Our number is 801-599-0691. And we take cases currently in Texas, Utah, and Nevada. And hopefully we can expand across the nation as we continue bringing people justice and support through Moxie Law Group.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed the legal aspect of this case, even though it is a tragedy, and my heart goes out to all those families. I hope they can all find peace and comfort and know that there's a whole country cheering them on and supporting them. So
agreed. Thanks, Jill. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, follow, and share. I'd love to hear your questions and feedback. You can contact me at community@jillcoyle.com. See you next time. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. Any advice given on the podcast is general and shall not be construed as legal advice.